Hey guys, and welcome back. Like a lot of people, I love my films, particularly stuff from the 80s and 90s. Recently I rewatched one of the films that I remember my parents hiring out for us when we were kids, and it kind of brought to mind all the scary bits in films you remember as a kid. Rewatching them these days, sometimes you wonder how it scared you, and sometimes it's just as scary as it ever was. Whilst growing up, my parents were actually pretty cool about what films we could rent out. We'd take a trip to our local video shop, which was called Video Solent back in the day, and our parents would happily rent out 18 plus videos for us, even though we were maybe 12, 13, and maybe my brother a little bit older. But yeah, some of these films maybe we shouldn't have been watching. Never did us any harm though. Well, at least until the nightmares stopped. This time, as a bit of fun, we're going to take a look at 15 of the scariest bits in films growing up that terrified me as a kid. By today's standards, some of these are going to look a little bit tame, whilst others are just as scary as they used to be. Let's get started. First film on my list is Gremlins. This was released in 1984 and it's rated 15. I think back in the day in the UK we got films maybe a year or two after the US, certainly film releases, but I still can't have been very old when I watched this for the first time. Definitely not 15, but my family sided with Betamax or Betamax if you're American over VHS back in the day, and I can still remember the massive number of previews this video cassette had on the front end before the film started. Absolutely loads of them. Thankfully back in the day you could just fast forward, unlike DVDs and Blu-ray. But in the film we learn the 3 rules for looking after your mogwai. Don't expose them to bright lights, don't get them wet, and don't feed them after midnight. Which leads to the questions, when after midnight can you start feeding them again, and what do they drink? But what a great film. We've got Phoebe Cates in this film, who was basically the babe of the 80s in my opinion. You've got your standard jump scares and things like that, but we see getting them wet leads to them multiplying, and feeding them after the midnight turns them into gremlins. These vicious little creatures cause all kinds of trouble, and they've got all kinds of ways of coming after you. Knives, bulldozers, chainsaws, everything. But it is Billy's mum defending her kitchen that wins the film for me. Knives, blenders and microwaves, absolutely fantastic. I remember one of the scenes I didn't like as a kid was the attack on Mrs. Deagle. This is where the gremlins hack her chairlift and she comes flying out the top floor window. Although she's portrayed as a real evil character in this film, I still felt really bad for her because she was so scared and terrified. These days it's just fun. But when I was really young, it was none of these scenes that really did it for me, not even the death of Stripe at the end, and the traditional jump scare. It was this scene at the swimming pool. There's nothing particularly scary about this scene, but for me it was the sound. I believe they made it using slowed down sounds of cats, but this sound just sounded absolutely terrifying to me. I really didn't like it. This sound is used in a few other scenes, but this one at the swimming pool, it's just horrible. I really hated this sound as a kid. Yeah, I think we pretty much all leapt out of our seats the first time we saw Fizzgig in Dark Crystal. This is a fantasy film and it came back out way back in 1982. And it's rated PG, but it does have a few dark themes in it as well. The Skeksis are kind of the bad guys in this film. This is a great fantasy adventure film. If you haven't seen this by some strange quirk, I'd say it's an absolute masterpiece of a kids film. But good for adults too. This film was directed by Jim Henson, so you know the puppeteering work is second to none. There's some fantastic matte painting work here as well as models, and there's loads of uniquely designed characters. Scary bits in this film were the Garthim. These are kind of the underlings of the Skeksis, and they're absolutely terrifying as a kid. Basically like spiders or crabs, and to me crabs are basically spiders of the sea. These things are really vicious, and they make that horrible clacking noise. It was the scene when Jen the Gelfling got ambushed that I really didn't like. There's those big red eyes and there's that horrible clacking sound again. Horrible. I was reading a thread online a few years ago and a lot of people seem to point back to this film, so it's good to know I'm not the only one who was scared of these things when I was a kid. But this film's an absolute masterpiece. Pick it up and we'll let Fizzgig have the last words.
No, Fizzgig, you stay here, dole.
This is Cat's Eye and it was released in 1985. Rated 15, and I think it's one of the first films that Drew Barrymore ever appeared in. The film split up into 3 separate stories, and each of them features this cat. The cat only appears briefly in the first 2 films, but has a bigger part in the third. The cat receives a message that a little girl needs help. The cat travels and finally finds the family that need help, and of course the little girl wants to adopt him. But being a Stephen King film, something scary's got to be happening, and in this one it's a little goblin who hides in the bedroom wall of this little girl. At night, the goblin comes out of the wall and kills the little girl's parakeet. The cat the little girl has named General scares the goblin off, but the parents are convinced the cat's responsible for killing the bird. The goblin's main goal is to steal the little girl's breath. And I think I was quite young when I watched this one as well, probably only around 10 years old, so this little thing was really scary at the time. Glowing red eyes, really ugly and really vicious as well. The mum finally catches General and takes him to the cat's home. This leaves the little girl with no one to protect her at night. Thankfully, General's not done yet and he manages to make an escape when his cage is opened, just in time as the goblin has just started to steal the little girl's breath. For the early 80s, I think they did quite a decent job at compositing 3 different images here. Big chase around the little girl's bedroom, but finally General catches the goblin on the record player and switches it on. And if you listen closely, the record player is playing Every Breath You Take, probably a reference to the goblin taking people's breath. General increases the speed and finally throws the goblin into the fan, and that's the end of him. The doubtful parents finally burst into the room and they find the goblin's dagger. They finally realise the daughter's been telling the truth all along. There was something hiding in her wall. A great film then. This guy terrified me when I was a kid. And I don't see many people talking about this film. Maybe it's a bit of a hidden gem. Check it out though, really good. Braindead or Dead Alive is our next film, and if you've ever seen this film you'll know it's one of the most gory films ever made. It starts out with Lionel trying to impress the local shop girl Paquita, initially not having much luck. However, Lionel's interfering mother follows them both to the local zoo, gets bitten by an infected monkey, and cue the zombies. Although this is a comedy horror, it is 18 for a reason. Lionel's mum first eats Paquita's dog, then she kills and zombifies the nurse that comes to help. The film's basically a complete bloodbath from start to finish. The whole film's kinda gross, but I do have some great memories of this film. I can remember my dad watching this for the first time and absolutely pissing himself laughing at the Kung Fu Vicar.
Stay back, boy. This calls for divine intervention. I kick ass for the Lord.
But of course it was that scene with the lawnmower that takes the top spot in this film. It's absolute carnage. And yet I can remember my dad laughing his head off at this bit. We got out so many different films on a Friday or Saturday night that there's no way he'll be able to remember this, but definitely a good memory, this one. Even if I did think it was pretty disgusting at the time. Definitely a cult classic film to pick up this one. Bring your sick bag. We're finally into space for the next one, and apparently Harvey Keitel's biographer noted this film as the lowest point in his career. This one wasn't a video rental though. I think my brother taped this off the TV. And I think I would have only been 10 or 11, and the robot in this film scared the hell out of me. Also starring in the film is Farrah Fawcett, and she's probably one of the only reasons this film is even known. I believe she was a big pin-up girl back in the day. But the film takes place on an outworld colony on Saturn, and the evil murdering Major is turning up with a new robot. This is going to replace one of the staff. And as expected, things don't go to plan. Major can interface with the robot, and it can share his thoughts, and unfortunately he's got the hots for Farrah. Now you might look at this robot and think it's not scary in the slightest, but seeing this thing aged 10 years old, I found it terrifying. I think they did a great job with the music and sounds in this film. It really brought a sense of terror when this thing was on screen. The creepy tiny head of the robot, along with the tubes and the fluids that it ran off, just gave it that extra bit of creepy. Hector the robot shares the captain's thoughts and goes nuts. They are successful in isolating the robot's brain to start with. Unfortunately, Hector can interface with all kinds of machinery. He connects to other robots and they rebuild him. This scene where he gets the hydraulic fluid pumped back into himself, I really didn't like this as a kid. I thought it was really creepy, along with the music, but they did a great job. That was what it was supposed to do. The most horrible scene was probably when he defeats the captain himself, gets his rival out of the way and ends up wearing his head. Thankfully, Kirk Douglas is on hand to take out Hector and save the day. Again, this is another film I don't hear anyone talking about. Maybe it went straight to the bargain bin, but this one's definitely worth a watch. At the number 10 spot and rated 15 is the film Troll, and we rented this film out at least twice. The story follows a young family as they move to a new apartment block, and in the basement there's a troll, and it can disguise itself as other people. One of the first things it does is start attacking the people in the other apartments. The horrible bit for me in this film occurs quite early on, when the troll stabs another guy in one of the apartments. After the guy's stabbed, he starts to go through this hideous transformation. And I found this absolutely repulsive as a kid. I thought it was disgusting then, and I think it looks disgusting now. Really horrible. I think it's the way this cocoon thing kind of has a face halfway through that makes it so horrible. But you have to admit, the troll himself is quite creepy too. I think it's something to do with that smile. This is such a strange film though. I'm sure you've heard of Troll 2 that came out after this, which is kind of known to be one of the worst films ever made. And rightly justified. But back in the day I had no idea that Troll 2 was even a thing. And it has been a while since I've watched this film all the way through. It's definitely due a rewatch. But it's so strange. It's got singing mushrooms and singing creatures, and they've also got their own little song in this film. It's really weird. Have a listen. We're at number 9, and in my opinion this is one of the best horror films ever made. Pet Sematary. Rated 18, and rightly so. A young family moves to a new area, and unfortunately the road outside their house is really busy with trucks thundering past day and night. Across the street is the Pet Cemetery, full of unfortunate animals that have been killed in the road, and beyond Pet Cemetery is the Indian burial ground. When their cat is sadly killed in the road, the next door neighbour advises taking it to the Indian burial ground, and not Pet Cemetery.
The place we're going is on the other side of that.
In films, movies or TV series, I don't think anything ever good has come of burying anyone in a disused Indian burial ground, and this one's no different.
Why, for God's sake? Jesus.
The daughter's pet cat Church comes back from the dead, but he's by no means the same cat. Sadly, another tragedy comes to the family, and this time their son, Gage, is hit by a truck. And if you've seen this film before, you'll know the father lets off the most torturous scream possible. Absolutely haunting. Following Gage's funeral, the father returns to the graveyard to exhume the body of his son. Now, I haven't got kids myself, but you can absolutely empathise with Lewis here. He just wants to spend a few more precious moments with his son. Despite all the warnings, Lewis still buries his son in the Indian burial ground. He can see it revive Church the cat, and he's hoping for the same for his son. But unfortunately, what you bury isn't always what comes back. And I think I'm going to have to censor this a little bit for YouTube. But for me, the part in this film that I never used to like was when Gage attacks the next door neighbour with a scalpel, right on the back of his ankle. You know, sometimes you watch a film or football game or something like that and you see someone take a football straight to the plums. You somehow feel that pain, and this is no different. But an absolute classic of a film though, well worth watching. There's also a remake of this film that's not bad. It's not quite as good as the original, but I was pleasantly surprised. Check it out.
Don't make it worse.
Aliens is at number 8, and I don't need to say too much about this one. Who hasn't seen Aliens by now? In my opinion, one of the best films ever made. Certainly the best action film ever made. I think this one came into the house by way of being loaned from a friend, and it's got plenty of jump scares in it and awesome special effects. I think one of the best things about this film is how it handles its build-up. It doesn't rush things, takes time to give you story and character development, and after that it's absolutely non-stop action. And this was a film I would love to see in the cinema. I never got to see it back in the day, but truly a masterpiece.
Who's firing? God damn it!
But this film goes to show you that it's not all about jump scares. For me, the scene that made me feel uneasy back in the day is the scene with Ripley and Newt in the medibay. Burke's locked them in there with no weapons, and then you see that slow rocking jar that the facehugger was in. I mean, you're just sat there thinking you are in some serious trouble now. I also really like the way they escape from this using the fire alarm to call the rest of the Colonial Marines. And it's crazy to think these are practical special effects. These are puppets and things being pulled on strings. These days it'd all be computers, but the way they scuttle, I think they've done it brilliantly. If you suffer from arachnophobia, as a lot of people do, there's no way you're not going to be terrified of facehuggers. I just really love this scene. I think it's just absolute terror and dread. No wonder then that this is one of my favourite films of all time. Now when you think of Wes Craven films, I'm pretty sure you're not going to be thinking about this one. It does genuinely seem like it's going to start out as a comedy, this film. This is Wes Craven's Deadly Friend, and this was another rental for my parents. The film centres around this guy Paul, who's interested in artificial intelligence and building robots. Not particularly convincing robots either. This is his creation, BB the robot, and for some reason Paul's deemed it necessary to make him sound like an asthmatic pensioner. Paul moves into the neighbourhood and he meets the girl next door. He's pretty socially awkward though, and things don't go well. Paul makes another friend and he shows him around the neighbourhood, including Elvira Parker's house. And yep, that is Anne Ramsey, better known as Mama Fratelli from the Goonies. Paul slowly starts to get somewhere with Sam until we meet the antagonist in this film. And in this case it's Sam's dad. This guy's a complete asshole, really abusive, and it's kind of suggested that he's sexually abusive towards Sam as well. So yeah, you'll hate him straight away. BB's basketball tricks aren't up to much, and unfortunately they lose the ball in Elvira's house. And Mama Fratelli, she's not giving that ball back. On Halloween they have the bright idea of using BB to break the combination to Elvira's front gate. This has predictable consequences, and shortly after Sam's abusive father throws her down the stairs and she falls into a coma. It's kinda here where the film picks up. Sam's body's in the mortuary but Paul busts her out, with the smart idea of using BB's brain to bring her back to life. Unfortunately Sam, now with the brain of the robot, has some enemies. The first person she goes after is her abusive dad. And this one's a real satisfying takedown. This guy's such an asshole. Credits to the actor, he's done a great job. Next, Sam goes to get their basketball from Elvira's house. And I think this might well be my most favourite kill in any horror film ever. Looking at it these days, it just looks funny with the effects, but I used to love watching this. We had a Betamax and it had like a slow reverse on it. So we'd just be sat there playing this forwards and backwards over and over again. But finally on to the bit that scared me about this film, and it's right at the end of the film, this bit. Sam's finally tracked down by the police and taken down. Paul goes to the mortuary to find her, but unfortunately she's now more robot than human. When I saw this bit back in the day, it absolutely terrified me. Looking at it now, you can't help but laugh. BB's head looks like something that I made in art class in junior school. Why has it got red eyes and teeth? No one knows. This is definitely one of the lesser known Wes Craven films, but I still really like it. Pick it up, it's a great watch. Quite a quick one this one, and I know what you're thinking, what on earth is Superman 3 doing on this list? Those who've seen this film will know. This film's got Richard Pryor in it, and anything with Richard Pryor in is good. It's also got the proper Superman, Christopher Reeve, and I'm fairly sure we had this taped off the TV onto our trusty Betamax video recorder, but we might well have rented it out as well.
That's me.
Near the end of the film, the bad guys hide in their underground lair. This is also home to the most powerful computer in the world. And for me, as funny as it looks now, it was the transformation scene that got me. The computer takes over one of the bad guys, and it's this transformation scene that terrified me as a kid. Again, it's just nothing these days, but I would have been really young when I watched this, and this scene always stuck with me. I'm sure a lot more people would have been scared of the Terminator back in the day, but never underestimate Superman's crap android.
Did you see that movie, Night of the Living Dead?
We're on to zombie movie royalty in Return of the Living Dead. There's absolutely loads of zombie films out there, Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, but the Return of the Living Dead series I really like. They've got the characters down just perfect, and it feels just so 1980s, this film. The film begins in a medical supply warehouse, and a canister of 2,4,5-trioxin, the government's secret experiment into reanimating gas, has accidentally been delivered. The gas gets released and the film is underway. But I love the characters in this film, especially Suicide, the punk guy here driving his clapped out old car. All these guys do is argue with each other. In the meantime, the gas is taking effect, and corpses are coming back to life. They've got to destroy the evidence, so in the incinerator it goes. Unfortunately, this has the side effect of releasing even more gas, and the zombie apocalypse has begun.
We don't
They want the ashes, eh?
Then I'll turn it up higher and we'll burn up the ashes too.
Very few individual zombies are actually credited in films, but this one has one called Tar Man, and he's quite famous. And you've got some traditional horror movie tropes here. The car won't start, the gun won't load, and the step breaks. I think Tar Man creeped me out back in the day just because of the way he moves, and it looks like he's covered in seaweed. He's quite vicious, but he's also quite smart. I was a bit disappointed he takes out the punk guy. I loved his shit talking in this film. But I would say Tar Man is a classic movie zombie, and certainly one I didn't want to meet when I was 11 or 12 years old. The guys thankfully managed to dispatch him with a quick shot of the baseball bat. But this is an absolute classic 80s zombie film. If you haven't seen it yet, pick it up, you will not be disappointed. The number 4 spot goes to Return of the Living Dead Part 3. And if there's one film in this entire list that deserves its 18 rating, it's this one. I do actually think some of the gore in this film goes a little bit overboard, it goes a little bit too far if that's such a thing, but it's precisely for that reason that it freaked me out back in the day. The first film in the series was kind of a comedy horror, the second film in the series was mainly a comedy, this one is a pure horror film. The army's still experimenting with 2,4,5-trioxin gas to reanimate corpses to use in the military, and one of the most unpleasant scenes in this entire film occurs right near the start. They're reanimating the bodies, and they're putting them back to sleep by hitting them with these frozen projectiles. Unfortunately, things don't go well. They remove this zombie's mouth restraints, and then everything falls down. One of the scientists gets attacked, but the other two scientists are able to put the original zombie back to sleep and restrain him. Unfortunately, the scientist that got bit is not far behind.
Strap that damn thing down before it wakes up again.
From here, it's just a continual zombie outbreak. People getting attacked, people getting shot, and it's probably one of the most gruesome openings to any film I've ever seen. If you've seen this film, you might well argue that this is actually one of the lighter scenes in the film, and you might well be right. The whole film's pretty gruesome, but this particular scene really stands out to me. The main couple in this film meet a guy later on called River Man. He's a homeless guy and all he does is try to help these people. But unfortunately, as one of them's been infected, he gets attacked and he turns into a zombie. And you really feel sorry for this guy, all he does is try to help. But it's a great film though, still a cult classic. No happy ending. And of course there had to be a Nightmare on Elm Street film on this list. As a kid, I was never really scared of the Friday the 13th films or the Halloween series of films, but I think the Nightmare series, some of the scenes are really creative, and this one's in part 3. But I think if you talk about this film, you've got to briefly mention the scene with the possessed bathroom tap. That certainly made me jump back in the day, a really creative scene, this one. This film's got the tagline Dream Warriors, and after Nancy's in hospital, she finds herself in a support group. People with sleeping issues, violence issues and drug issues. Or in Nancy's case, fear of falling asleep.
Okay, group's in session. Straight talk only in this room.
Today I'd like to start getting us acquainted with our new staff member, Nancy Thompson.
The bit I was really grossed out by as a kid was when Freddy turns one of the kids into a marionette. He first attacks him and then uses his veins to guide him to his death. I thought this scene was absolutely disgusting. It's almost a bit like that scene in Pet Sematary that I mentioned earlier, with the ankle slashing. You can kind of watch this bit and you can almost feel it. There's a few deaths in this film, but this one really sticks out to me. Great special effects and scared me to death as a kid. This is a great film though, I love it when the guys get their own back on Freddy. They all get their separate powers to beat Freddy with, but it's the geeky guy that sticks out to me. The guy that's in a wheelchair who's really into Dungeons and Dragons. The other guys might get super strength or fighting skills, but it's this guy being able to fight back as a wizard that really wins the day. Another classic, and one I'm sure you'll all have seen by now. Down to the last two then, and we're starting with Poltergeist. But maybe not what you expect. I'd say this film is easily in my top 10 films. It's an absolute masterpiece and one of the best horror films of all time. The special effects they managed to achieve on this film back in the 80s was absolutely incredible. The film's got a great soundtrack too, especially Carol Ann's theme. Heather O'Rourke, who played Carol Ann, sadly passed away during the filming of the third film. I remember finding out as a kid that she'd passed away, and it was a real shock. Maybe because I probably wasn't that much older than her when I watched this film. But she was a great actress. I think she's absolutely brilliant in this film. There's loads of great practical effects in this film. I like how they start out this film with fairly unusual things happening in the house and they build it up slowly. There is kind of a modern remake of this film. I think it was released in 2015. It actually starts out fairly well, but unfortunately it loses its way. Nothing can beat the original. But if you've seen this film, I know what you're thinking. I bet it's the bit with the clown. And actually it's not. Not for me anyway. Remember, this is stuff that really scared me as a kid. And whilst clowns are creepy, and the one in this film is absolutely terrifying, there's no doubt about it, for me it was another scene, and it's one that's quite inconsequential. And if you've watched the film, you might even barely acknowledge it. It's the scene where Diane walks past Carol Ann's bedroom. At this point in the film, Carol Ann's gone missing. Diane knows to keep her bedroom door locked, but she really misses her daughter. She just wants to hear her voice again, and she tries the door. Like I say, you'll probably think this is an insignificant part of the film, but the scream that's let out when the doors opened absolutely terrified me as a kid. I think probably for at least the next 5 years after that, I fast forwarded past it. I couldn't listen to it. So that's a bit of an odd one. It does seem a little bit strange what frightened us when we were kids. Things you wouldn't even acknowledge today. Yeah, there was something about the suspense and that scream, something I just didn't like when I was a kid. I couldn't wait to get past it. Like I say though, it's an absolute classic film. If you haven't seen this film in a long time, give it a rewatch. It hasn't lost anything. So we're at the number 1 spot, and of course you're going to disagree with it, but that's what the comment section's for. When I was a kid, this film had the scariest part of any film I've ever seen. Yep, it's the sequel, Poltergeist 2. I think this film got a bit of a hard time back in the day, but I really enjoyed it. Although it's a bit of a retread, I still think it's a really great film. Not quite up there with the original, but not far off. After the events of the first film, the family are finally safe. Without the older sister, of course, but no one mentions that. But it's not long till some strange things start happening. I checked and this film came out in 1986. So maybe in America they got that on film in 87, and maybe in the UK we got it in 88. But this was definitely a rental from the local video shop, and I couldn't have been more than 10 years old when this came out. No wonder it scared me to death.
Are you lost, sweetheart? Are you afraid, honey?
And if you're talking about this film, you've got to talk about the iconic performance by Julian Beck as Reverend Kane. This guy's performance must have been parodied so many times in other films, but he gives an absolute fantastic performance here.
God is in his holy
The film also has some good special effects. I don't think they're quite up to the level of the first, but they're still pretty good. Stephen the father's trying to protect the family, and Reverend Kane comes round to visit. And this guy projects a real essence of unease in this film. He's not scary as such, just, I don't know, creepy. Friendly, yet creepy. But there were 2 scenes in this film that I really didn't like. Let's take a look at the first. The first is that scene with Robbie's braces. Credit to the effects department here, I think they did a really good job. I kind of feel this is kind of similar to the scene with the facehugger in Aliens. You're stuck in a room with something you can't escape, and it's something that's attached to you. But as great and as scary as this scene was, it's not even close to the number 1 spot. So here it is, the scene that scared me more than anything else when I was a kid. Yep, it's that scene that starts with a tequila worm. Stephen's absolutely exhausted from protecting the family, and he just takes a moment out, just to have a quick rest and a little drink. Stephen seems possessed and he goes off to attack his own family.
You saw it clearly. How the hell do you know that? Because I am smart. Oh, Mommy Jess. Don't
Stephen starts to attack Diane, but Diane tells him she still loves him, and that breaks the hold the monster has over Stephen, and thus begins the most terrifying moment in movie history. The scene starts with Stephen really violently throwing up this monster. I'll let the rest of this scene play out, but this thing was the thing that scared me more than anything as a kid. I can genuinely remember waking up after having nightmares of this thing. The way it violently thrashes around on the carpet, but then it's the monster it turns into. Back in the late 80s, my parents had a bed just like this one. 4 legs but nothing under it, no drawers or anything like that. And I was convinced as a kid that this thing lived under it. The monster goes through another violent transformation under the bed, and it becomes what I think is known as the Vomit Demon. This thing was designed by H.R. Giger of Aliens fame. It certainly scared the hell out of me. This thing's covered in slime, it's got exposed ribs, but I think it was the little flappy bits on the end of his feet that was really scary for me, the way they flap around and the noise they make. I believe they got a war veteran who'd lost his legs to play this guy. He was the only guy that could fit in the suit and make it convincing. But yeah, that was it, the most terrifying moment for me in a film ever made. Let me know what the scariest moments in films were for you as a kid, and I'll catch you next time. And don't have nightmares.